And it wasn't evolution that made people think that. It wasn't even the old age of the earth. It was just the actual text of Genesis.
Where did Cain's wife come from? And again, this is going to kind of open us up for a number of questions that we can dialogue about. But what would your answer be to where did Cain get his wife from?
Well, I would say is that there's no innovation to Christian theology to recognize that for thousands of years, people have wondered that maybe there was just other people God had made outside the garden. And it wasn't evolution that made people think that. It wasn't even the old age of the earth. It was just the actual text of Genesis that made people wonder that. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Now, I'm very aware of these really creative gap theories that young earth creationists and others will put forward. You can call them gap theories or incest theories or whatever. Right. I mean, I guess you could do those backflips, but why? When it's not really something you have to do. I mean, so I just think that you could do those backflips. I just think that ends up really altering what the text says. I think that text is pretty. It seems to be pretty clear to me is that God created Adam and Eve in the Adamah, to inhabit the garden and eventually to be a blessing across the entire earth. That's why they're given the command to spread across the entire earth. But the Eretz was a larger place, and there were already people out there that God had made. And when they're expelled from the garden, they ended up meeting these other people in a fallen state and intermingling with them. I think that's just like a very plain, obvious reading of Genesis.
Yeah. And again, it's one of those things where as you were explaining it in your book, I guess the typical mantra has been, and the typical answer that I've given has been, Genesis 2 is kind of a zoomed in view of day 6 in Genesis 1. And your contention was that Genesis 1 was largely separated from Genesis 2. Genesis 1 was talking about, yes, you have the creation of the animals and the plants, and you also have creation of people, of Adam, of the human race. That's what the
Well, if you look at my
means.
phrasing, it's a little more circumspect than that precisely. The key part that I would say I am very certain of is that there are two accounts. There's Genesis 1 and there's Genesis 2.
Right.
I think a fundamental question is how those two relate. Now, I don't take a strong position either way. I see a lot of legitimacy to the sequential view, which is the idea that Genesis 1 happens first, and then at a later time, Genesis 2 happens.
Right.
But that's not necessary. So, for example, Jack Collins and Mike Heiser would say, no, that there's enough textual reasons to think that these things are bound together. I don't know how they rule out the idea that they're typologically bound together, but not bound together by the exact historical events. They haven't explained that to me.
Right.
But let's say we even say that they're just describing the same physical events in different ways. They still think that Genesis 1 is talking about a broader event that's over potentially it's definitely over a larger time span, and also over a larger geographic scope than what happens in Genesis 2. So then nothing in Genesis 1 says that God only made one couple. He could have made a lot of couples. And he doesn't say how he made them. So
right.
Maybe he made them by a process of evolution. And then Genesis 2 tells us about one of the couples that he made. So in the end, I just don't see how you could really claim that that's in conflict with the idea of people outside the garden. The only way to really to do that is if you're really coming with a lot of strong preconceptions about what Scripture must tell us, that you then read into it. But I don't think that that's a good way to read Scripture. I mean, I'm not trying to read evolution into it. I mean, I can show with evidence that it's not evolution that leads people to think this about Scripture. It's certainly not what led me to think this. I was wondering about this when I was a young earth creationist that rejected evolution. What really is there is just what the actual text of Genesis says. When you actually read what Genesis says, even, I would say that the reading that I really put forward is a more literal reading than young earth creationism. So the issue is not even a literalism.
Right.
I mean, you could take a literalistic, inerrantist, Chicago Statement's view of hermeneutics that doesn't even engage ancient Near Eastern literature if you want. And this would be a plausible answer.